Okay guys and girls, it's just a little note to let you know that this video is only for your personal use and it's not for uploading to anywhere else. Before we get started with changing the 300 TDI timing belt, a bit of information that you need to know, and I'll be using, with kind permission from Paddock, the references to timing belt kits. So, usual timing kit is this one here, and it starts from a certain chassis number. This is a later kit because Land Rover did actually have a problem with the timing belts. And you can see here a reference to an earlier type and a later type on their pages. Now, scrolling down, I'm going to have a look at a belt tensioner here. The earlier tensioner would have looked like this, with lips on it. You can see it in the flesh here, how it is. And this was not a very good design, and they changed this a bit later on. It'll be worth checking your workshop manual, if you have one, to see how it explains the tensioner. In this case, this has plates and a slotted washer and a bolt. This is definitely the early type. The later type has dispensed with the washers, as we'll see as we carry on. The later type of tensioner, or the one we mainly see, is this one. It has no lips on it. Our project engine has this type of adjuster. The other significant difference is the crank pulley down here actually has the lips on it. Now you'll notice this between the two kits if you come across it. Alright, well we'll have an extra deep look at this because what I need to show you is the technical bulletin that came out from Land Rover in 1998. The bulletin number is L8424BU, and you should be able to, if you Google it, find this document online. This is a PDF. This was released by Land Rover after the failure of some timing belts, and it was a warranty issue at the time. Check up on the date there, it says the 25th of the 3rd, 1998. This affects all 300 TDIs prior to VIN numbers on the Discovery, Defender and the Range Rover Classic. You can see those here. The warranty problems that Land Rover were facing were timing belt failure and misalignment, and this is premature wear of the timing belt due to misalignment of the belt and the pulleys. If you have a workshop manual, you might have the 300 TDI overhaul manual, and this covers models from 1995 onwards. If you purchase this like I did, or you've downloaded it, or you have a rave disc, you should check the updates that are in it. Publication number is LRL0070ENG, and you clearly see the date is 1997. The workshop manual explains and shows the plates and washers that are used on an earlier timing belt. We discussed this already in an earlier section, and the kit is 300E, or timing kit 300E from Paddock. Some vehicles are still running around with this kit on it and they haven't been touched and don't have a problem with the timing belt or distorted casings. The warranty repair kit, there's two of them here, which is STC4095K. You can see what's actually involved there, and STC4096K. It's already been some time since these warranty issues came to light, and the kits are now not available. The kit that's available is STC4096L, which doesn't have the front cover, the FIP pump support bracket or the dowels. It just has the timing belt kit with a bottom crank pulley. I'd also like to add that Paddock have STC4096LDR kit camshaft, which also has a P gasket in it and the seals, because now these engines are getting old. We're now replacing more than just the timing belt kit. If a vehicle had a warranty job done on it, a dab of yellow paint at least 2 centimeters square was put on the timing case in position showed in this illustration. Not that we'll find many of these, I'm sure. There are a few discrepancies with information, and a workshop manual that's out of date won't have this information. And what it's saying is there's a torque of 11 Newton meters on a new belt when you put the tension on it. There are still people pulling belts up at 15 Newton meters on the new idler and pulley situation, but Land Rover recommend that the procedure is done properly, or it's essential that it's done precisely. This might be a shock to some people, but they also recommend on the stud hole is to have a 2mm chamfer at 45 degrees on this stud hole. Looking at our project engine, up there where the stud is, there's no chamfer. However, this engine has run and it's done about 140,000 miles, so the choice is yours if you want to take action on this information. In my toolbox, I have myself a couple of tools which are vital when changing a timing belt. These are crank damper holders, and that's the 200 TDI one, and this one here is for the 300 TDI. As you can see, it's very well built compared to the one which is a Churchill tool, which is the LRT special. They're built to serve just one purpose. In the 300 TDI crank damper you have 4 M8 by 1.25 bolt holes, and this is where the tool bolts are screwed into. Before using this, they need to be tightened up, and they're Allen key heads. The dog nut is 27mm, and yes, this is an impact socket. If you were doing this in a vehicle, you would have the aid of chassis rails, which I don't have the luxury of here with it on the engine stand. Now you need a long bar and enough access to get this wound off. There's no other way around it. Unless you were very fortunate and somebody had left the nut quite loose, just using a 1/2 inch breaker bar with that sort of length will not be long enough to get this nut undone. It is very tight. Using a 3/4 bar with an extension on it is somewhere near what you need. Okay, this is what I'm using. This tool is the exact LRT 12080 retaining tool, but Land Rover are not very specific how to use it. Just as a demonstration, and I haven't even torqued this nut up yet before trying to get an angle on it, this 1/2 inch breaker bar is losing energy by bending, and we're getting nowhere near the torque required when tightening this up. The correct way to do this when tightening the nut up is to set the torque and then take the bolt through 90 degrees. That's the correct setting. Alright, so with this set on the other side to tighten the nut up, and this will be on the chassis rail, you're using something like a 27mm socket, either deep, semi-deep, whatever, extension, and a decent stout bar. This way, now I haven't got the chassis bar here, this way you can pull it through 90 degrees and you're well happy. You can see there's no bending of the bar there, there's no energy being lost, and we can get our 90 degrees on there easily. Alright, I'm doing this visually. You can use a dial gauge, however this is the best way to do it. In fact, it's the only way to do it. The second application for this crank holding tool is for holding the crank while you're undoing the flywheel bolts. Now they're fairly tight, but at least it can be done. So there you have it. I'm going to put these back in the box for now and use them when I'm going to do the next timing belt on a 300 TDI. The torque wrench seen in this video is PM1254, which is available from Paddock. And while you're there, you can pick yourself up an angle torque gauge, which is PM1260. The LRT 12080 for the 300 TDI is available on eBay, so check out the link below in the video. The cost of it is about third the price of the original tool which Land Rover did supply. First toolbox, tool review, take one. Right, hello, welcome to the Trailer Fitters Toolbox. Today we're going to have a look at two timing pin kits, Sealy one and one from Paddock. The Sealy kit I've been using for at least 6 years now, and this is the components we have in it. And I'm sure if you've been following our YouTube channel you would have seen some tutorials on how this is used anyway. Basically this is a comprehensive kit which does Land Rover diesel engines, okay, and we have a puller here for the TDI engines. You have your pump support and the tools to go with it. Probably the most vital thing in this kit is the timing pin. Alright, you can see here that I'm using on a 200 TDI engine. You could use a drill of the same size, however the kit is packed with a lot more stuff than just the timing pin itself. For tolerances I've measured the pins and they are exactly the same. I know maybe it's being a bit pedantic, but because this kit is cheaper I was just curious to find out how different it was. Timing pins which you screw into the flywheel housing to time up your flywheel, like this. Okay, they're supplied in the Paddock kit. You have 3 of them. On the left hand you have the Sealy kit, on the right hand side you have the Paddock kit. You have more in the Paddock kit. Now comparison, this is the 200 TDI and this should be the 300 TDI. They're exactly the same threads and the same pin sizes. Alright, you get one extra with the Paddock kit. Now with the Sealy tool you have a nice resting place, whereas the Paddock kit you pop it in. Big deal. This is the most interesting part, is 18G 1458. Alright, now this is for the older 2.5 litre diesels, the Lucas DPA pumps. The pin is inserted on the fuel injection pump in a certain place, as you can see here. There is a difference the way these two pins are sprung loaded. One is loaded biased towards locking in, and the other one where you have to push it in to lock it. Alright, now this is the Sealy one and this is the Paddock one where you have to push it in to locate it into a slot. In the Paddock kit you have a combination pump support tool and a puller. Alright, puller part being the threaded part here. As you can see there's a thread in here which will use a bolt. Alright, good quality steel. Now the puller's assembled like this. You have 4 bolts in the kit and you also have the threaded part with a ball bearing in the center. Alright, and this corresponds with this part which fits in the crank shaft where the bolt was. Alright, so you have something to push against. This is the Sealy part, okay, corresponding, and it's exactly the same size, same thickness, fairly robust puller. Alright, you can see it here being used on a 200 TDI engine. The other part of this combination tool is that you have a pump pulley support tool. Okay, now I do have a tutorial video on this. Pump timing pin. Okay, what this is designed to do is to hold the pulley for the pump while you remove the fuel injection pump with the timing cover on. Alright, so you have 2 bolts and a timing pin. Okay. And here in the Sealy kit, okay, you have the same pump support tool, okay, you can see that, and I'll put them together so you can compare. Okay, they're exactly the same tolerances. Alright, no problem there. So the combination tool is corresponding exactly with the professional tool I have here, and I can't see a quality difference in the metals at all. In fact, I could say that they were almost turned in the same factory. From the point of view of looking towards the quality, then they are very similar. Okay, now the pieces might vary slightly, but the tolerances are exactly the same, and you're looking at all the major components to do a timing pins on at least 4 or 5 different diesel engines. Try not to big up the Paddock kit. It is better because there is an extra pin in here. You have a combination tool, and the cost is the determining factor to say that the Paddock tool is actually better than the Sealy tool. Beats it for value hands down. If you do research on these two tools, then the Sealy tool is about 4 times the price. Okay, so there you go. If you're unsure about what type of timing belt kit you actually have in your engine, I would recommend stripping out first the front cover and having a look, and then take it from there and order what you need to. But for now, in this tutorial, we'll get onto the job and I'll show you how the timing belt's done properly. Okay, I know there isn't much space between the radiator and the pulleys on the 300 TDI. What I'd recommend for working in there, especially if you plan your servicing right, is to remove the radiator so you've got plenty of space to work in. That way, if you've got long sockets to undo crank dog nuts and the such like, this will give you a chance to flush out your radiator and renew your antifreeze as well. This is what I mean by planning. The Land Rover Discovery and some of the Defenders have short cowlings, so keep this in mind when you approach the job. Okay, just for clarity, I'm going to be doing this on an engine out of the vehicle. Okay, viscous fan off, and then you want to remove your serpentine belt. Quite easy to do. And then what you need to do is remove the pulley. If you have air conditioning, obviously you'll be wanting to remove a few more pieces, the idler and tensioner, but for now we're just doing a basic 300 TDI engine. The next and probably most difficult job is removing the dog nut that's holding on the crank damper. You've already seen how to use the holding tool, so now let's have a look how the puller will pull off the crank damper on the 300 TDI engine. What we're going to have a look at in this video is how to use this combination tool as a puller. This puller tool you can use on the 200 TDI and the 300 TDI crankshaft damper. The reason I call it a crankshaft damper is because it damps vibrations on the crankshaft. The rubber in here acts as a damper. So we're in the workshop and I'm going to use a threaded bolt in this combination piece here, and I've got the 4 bolts, the longest here, along with this part here which fits into the crankshaft where the dog nut would be. Generally with this puller you have the boss which will fit into the crank here, and it assists the puller. Problem is that it doesn't fit in by itself and sit there until you've got the puller in place. 4 bolts, and on the crankshaft you'll see how it fits on. This crank damper or pulley has 4 bolt holes here which might need lubrication or possibly a tap running through. If you can't screw them in, then you'll have to use a tap. Once it's fitted, you want to have the bolts evenly distributed, and the thread also needs to be lubricated. This will ensure the life of the tool. So there's nothing too hard about this. You can see the boss is in place now. Using a socket which is 24mm, you can then wind it and pull your crank damper off the crankshaft. This will leave you access to get to your timing belt or any other jobs that you need to do underneath the timing case cover. This tool, after using it, seems to be quite robust. The only problem with this is that if you push the bolts in too far, it will push off the dirt shield behind the crank damper itself. What it comes down to is the 4 bolts are actually just a little bit too long, and it doesn't give you enough thread on the puller. There's something to watch out for, otherwise it's a good tool. This tool does the job that needs to do, and at the price of it I wouldn't complain. So once you've pulled that off, you then have the cover plate. Now you have a set of bolts, you can see I'm pointing them out, and they have to come out. From the 300 TDI workshop manual, what you'll find that it will tell you exactly what the length of the bolts are and where they are. We keep them in this order. All the bolts are M8 by 1.25 and they have 10mm heads, unless somebody's changed them. The bolts do come in varying lengths, so make sure that they go back in exactly the same place. Once the bolts are out, then you can give this a bit of a tap to break the seal. I'm using a dead blow hammer here for aluminium, or use a soft hammer to break the seal and remove it. What you find under the cover plate is the pulleys for your fuel injection pump, your camshaft and your crankshaft, as well as an idler and the belt adjuster tensioner. Okay, well in this section we're going to set the engine timing. First thing to do is to refit the crank dog nut into place, and what this does is give you the ability to be able to wind the crankshaft around, and you'll need to be able to do this. Now you see I'm lining up the camshaft to the marker here on the casing. So the marker's lined up, and you will also need a peg in the fuel injection pump. So that leaves the crankshaft just here. There's a marker, and you can see the slots in the pulley which correspond with the pointer that's on the timing case at the rear. Okay, well that's one way to get it to TDC, but the most accurate way to do it is to put the timing pin in the rear on the flywheel housing and put it up to the slot, like so. This is the most accurate way of getting the crankshaft right. You will need a timing pin to lock up the pulley for the fuel injection pump, like so. And this is vital, and you'll know why through this tutorial. So the markers are lined up now, and we're ready to undo the belt. 3 bolts that hold the pulley onto the pump drive will need to be slackened off so it's loose and the pump timing pin is in place. So make sure you've slackened off all 3 of these before going any further. Right, so now your engine's timed up, you can remove the adjuster tensioner. And this is done with an Allen key, and the bolt holds the tensioner onto the backing plate as so, and this will have thread lock on it. So that's a way you can now remove the belt. Now depending on what you're going to do, it's just a matter of slipping the belt off, just as easy as that. With the later kit, you can see here the adjuster, you have a slot on the backing plate here, okay, different to the earlier one which doesn't have that. It is just simply a hole and then you put a slotted washer over the top. It's a similar slotted plate to what you'll find on the 200 TDI engine as well. The adjuster itself is held on by a set screw, and you can use an Allen key to remove it, metric. And on the idler itself here, you can use a 15mm socket on that one, easily removed, socket, whatever. I'd recommend having the whole kit replaced, the idlers, adjuster and the belt, especially since the high mileages it will have attained by the time you get around to changing it. If you noticed, when I was putting the timing pin in here, I'd actually moved the crank just slightly, and that put that out of time, so you can see that. With the belt off, I can then reset the pulleys. Now here's a bit of a warning. I would get your pointers at eye level and not look down on them from the top of the engine, so you can get them just right. This is what I mean. If you take your radiator out and your front grille and it's just right, you get the pointers at eye level, so they are perfectly right. The engine will run with the camshaft a tooth out, however it would be better if you had the markers exactly right. This will stop the valves hitting the pistons. Okay, the reason that we slacked off these bolts and allowed this pulley to move is the pump's locked in place with the pin, and when we put the belt on and tighten the tension up onto it, it will actually move a little bit. This will allow movement and stop any other pulleys from actually moving and being knocked out of time. So when we're setting it, we want to set it sort of halfway with the pin in place. Alright, so it will allow movement. You can see, just like that. Remember in the last part we timed up our engine? We also removed the belt, and we got our engine timed up just perfectly. Crank markers here, if you remember, we had to get these right. And now what you're looking at is the front end. Not an ideal situation, but it can be done. What I'd like to show you is the piston and how it rises actually above the block. And you can see the dial gauge was set at 0 and the piston actually rises above the top deck. So a bit closer, you can see that. Alright, when we set our markers is at TDC. If it's slightly out, it won't be at top dead center. It'd be better to stick a timing pin in the flywheel make sure that the engine is timed up absolutely perfect. Crank and cam need to be timed up. You can always retime the fuel pump afterwards. Now there's a couple of kits here. One's a Sealy Tools kit, which has the pins and a puller for about £200, and then there's a kit you can get from Paddock for about £60. These comparable, they're both the same, they do the same jobs, and these tools, well, they're actually vital. Okay, hello, welcome once again to the Land Rover Toolbox videos. I'm going to show you something about timing pins for the flywheel and what you can do with them and how you use them properly. And also there's a little secret with the Paddock's timing pin kit which I should really make you aware of. Okay, so setting the timing on our engines for fitting the timing belts. I've gone on about this in various tutorials, so you should know that using this crank marker here isn't exactly accurate. Using a timing pin in the flywheel housing here, which screws in the drain plug hole, you'll find there's a couple of different ones in the kit. Okay, now getting the slot into the center place, because sometimes it won't be exactly there, I'm using a bladed screwdriver and just feeling where it is going to go. As you can see, it's on one side and I'm moving it over with the screwdriver. I can push it all the way over to the other side, so the screwdriver's at an angle. Now watch this, screwdriver's at an angle so the slot is not in place and the pin will go no further than that. Okay, so the pin isn't engaged. So using the screwdriver again and just bringing it over, I'm now bringing this central, okay, and I can feel that. The axle's actually in the way, so I can't get a camera up there to show you, and I think you already know that it's quite hard to see the slot on your Land Rover. So I can go ahead now, and I've got the slot dead center to the drain hole. Alright, so I can screw this in, and what will happen, and you'll see this in the video clip here, is the pin slips in and it's home. Alright, now that is in the slot, okay? That's where it should be located. Once that's there, then the timing belt can go on easily. It's not a problem, and that will be timed up dead accurately. Okay, well, where the issue actually becomes tricky is that if you have something like a conversion where somebody's used a flywheel and maybe the flywheel housing that might be different to the engine itself. In the Paddock kit you have 3 timing pins and the sizes are different and the threads are different, okay? Left hand side being the 300 TDI timing pin, and on the right hand side is the 200 TDI timing pin, which also fits the 19J and the other naturally aspirated engine. Right, so what you can do with these, and I found this out by accident, I don't know if this is actually a built-in design or not, but you can actually remove this first, and this enables you to remove the pin from the body. Alright, so that's quite easy. That's the 200 TDI one. Now you can do the same thing with the 300 TDI flywheel timing pin, and what you have are the threads and the body. So if you had a 200 TDI flywheel, 300 TDI flywheel casing, what you get is the correct timing pin for the engine. This is just a little bit of information for people who have converted vehicles. In my case, I have a 200 TDI Discovery engine fitted to an LDV vehicle, which is quite an easy conversion, and I've used a different flywheel, so I have an adapted kit. If you're finding oil, it could well be an oil seal. I've either got the crankshaft seal down here, now it's common 200, 300 TDI engines, and you also have the seal behind the cam pulley as well. Now, a note of warning that if you're actually going to have to change the seal on this one, is that you undo the centre bolt and not the 3 bolts, otherwise you put the cam out of time. 2 pulleys are exactly the same for the FIP and for the camshaft. you'll probably notice one has been turned around the other way. If you don't know what you're doing with cam timing, then don't undo the 3 bolts that are on holding the locking plate to the cam pulley. That's why some of you might have a mysterious top end rattle that you can't get rid of. You can see valves hitting pistons here, that will be the inlet valves. You have to undo the 3 bolts on the FIP, but if you do it on the camshaft you'll lose the timing. Okay, so presuming that you have no problems, no leaks, or you've cleaned them up and put the seals, put the idler back on and the adjuster. But what I do is I leave the bolt out of the adjuster first of all, and I put the belt on. Okay, starting at the crankshaft, I'll slip that on and get the teeth into place. Alright, now what you do, and the tension is already set on that side, the belt should fit nicely there, and then you draw it round. I know it's a bit fiddly, it's even worse in a vehicle. Alright, then I've brought it round onto the FIP pump pulley. Alright, and if you remember, I told you to leave some slack so it will move slightly. All the teeth on the belt are sitting in their respective grooves and it's not out of place anywhere, so you can now slip it and it's ready to be adjusted up. From the manual, Land Rover recommend using a dial type tension gauge and not a torque wrench which clicks. However, this is a quite expensive tool, so we found something different instead. You can find this from Draper Tools, and we showed this when we did the 200 TDI timing belt. The slot you see, square drive slot, I've got an extension and I've got this tension tool which I can use, which has been zeroed in. So I pull the belt up to tension, and the tensions are on the screen in Newton meters. I'm sorry, it's not in pounds foot. And then it's a matter of locking this bolt up first of all. Once it's locked up, okay, you can then check the belt to see if it's alright, see if it's got the right amount of teeth in it. So I'm just nipping it here and not torquing it up at this point in time. And then the next thing to do is to make sure that your pump pulley, the bolts are done up. Now there's a thing with this, what you've got to be aware of is that the tool itself should slide in and out easily. If it doesn't, then readjust it just slightly. Don't forget to take the timing pin out like that, and then you can wind the engine round. I'm using a 27mm spanner, and this is a professional trick. You wind the crankshaft around twice, and the cam and the FIP pulley will go around once respectively. Now what should happen if the belt is right and it's sitting in the right place and it's timed up properly, the marker should come back to exactly the same place. I know if you've got this with a cylinder head on, you're going to have compression to fight with, but what we're looking at is to get the markers exactly right. Now you have to remember that it's the camshaft and the crankshaft that need to be timed up. The FIP, like here, isn't exactly right, okay, so I've had to move it just a little bit to get the pin in, and you'll see that the marker will go out of place on the camshaft. Okay, now instead of going by the timing on the pump, which I'm struggling to get the pin in, alright, look, you see the marker's out at that point there. Now this is not right, you'll have problems. You can reset this pump, and it's just a matter of undoing the 3 bolts and then using the center bolt to move the pump drive around. It's the same as if you're going to be doing this with the timing case front cover on. You can actually reset the pump timing with the cover on and with the pins. Okay, so I'm having a look here, see how it goes. This is actually on the 200 TDI, but it's the same as the 300 TDI. Pump is timed up. As long as you know your engine, your camshaft and your crankshaft are alright, then you can reset and check your pump timing at any point. Just to recap on what I've said, if your pump timing's out, you set your engine first of all, and then you go back to set your pump. You've got your bolts slackened off, your 3 bolts, you can then move the pump just slightly and retime it. That way your pump pin will slide in and out. Afterwards you can then just tighten the bolts up and torque them up. Don't forget to Tighten the idler and the adjuster just right. So after then, it's a matter of putting your front cover back on. Now the way I've showed you, you shouldn't have to put the crank damper back on and run it up to see if it will actually run. This will run, it's all perfectly set nicely. Just to remember that these bolts are of a certain length and they have to go back in the same way, so get that right. The bolts go in a certain sequence, usually from the inside and then spread outwards, so 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way up to number 14. The fan pulley goes back on, just loosely for now. When you've got the belt on, you can then tighten these nuts up to their torque. Hello and welcome to the Trailer Fits Toolbox. Today we're going to have a look at the P gasket for the 300 TDI engine. Now it looks like this, looks like a P possibly, but on the side it looks like a fallen down P. It fits in here, which is between the water galleries between the aluminium casing and the block. First you'll probably know about it is you'll find coolant that's dripping down at this point where the arrow is showing. It is a weak point with the 300 TDI and it will need to be done at some point. Right, so you'll need a water pump gasket and the P gasket. Numbers here and the links will be below in the video. And we're going to have to do a fair bit of stripping to get to this. It's an extensive job, but one that can be done quite easily. Before you go ahead and strip the engine, alright, the first thing you need to do is drain the coolant and remove the coolant hoses from the top. So what I'm doing here, I'm using a 1/4 inch, possibly 7mm socket to undo the Jubilee clips. Alright, you can see a bit of fluid dripping out there, and the heater hose also needs to be removed. You'll find near the dipstick a bung plug which you can drain off the coolant from the cylinder block. Bit fiddly to get to, but use the 13mm spanner to wind it off. Of course the water's been collected underneath in a container. Just something to loosen the pipe off because they get stuck. You have to undo this clip. This is actually 300 TDI. This pipe is very close to the water pump pulley. Right. There we go. The biggest hindrance you'll have is the intercooler piping at the top here. You can see it's connected to the EGR valve on the turbo. 2 bolts hold that on. You can remove this if you want to. If not, just be careful not to snap the piping, otherwise you'll lose intercooler pressure. We have here a thermoviscous fan hub coupling remover, which is 32mm. Good idea to remove this, and then once it's out of the way, you've got more area to work on without being hindered. This has a left-hand thread on it, so you undo it, tightening it up as such. Very easy to remove, just remember not to drop it, hold it with your hands. And if you look at the hub nut here, you can see somebody's actually tried to remove it earlier with a chisel. Not a good idea, best to use a spanner. Look, you see the damage on that? Okay, before you remove the serpentine belt, just loosen off the pulley nuts. You can see I've got my hand holding the belt on the top pulley there, or on this case, the power steering pulley. Alright, I'll pull the belt a bit tighter so it will grip. Alright, and you should be able to undo them. They're not that tight, even if they have thread lock on them. Once they're undone, using a 15mm socket and breaker bar, you can then lift up the adjuster and remove the belt. Easy. Okay, that's spring loaded and out of the way now, so you can carry on stripping. The alternator needs to come off next, and you can see the bottom bolt. Don't pay attention to the person walking through the door. Bottom bolt here, it's a 10mm head. The thread is M8 by 1.25, and yes, I did have problems with this. The thread was stripped out. Unfortunately, with aluminium, once the thread has been stripped, there is not enough metal to re-tap it. There is a kit available which you can add a new thread to. This is quite common on all engines with aluminium components, not just Land Rover, and the thread restorer, you tap it, drill it, tap it, and fit a new thread in, and these are usually stronger. Now with these more modern engines, you don't have the adjustment on the alternator, but on the top bolt you still have a pivot bolt here. Alright, 13mm bolt and a 10mm head on here. Remove that. Just don't forget that you have wiring at the back here. I would presume you would have disconnected your battery beforehand, and removing the alternator is actually quite easy with the pipes removed, the coolant hoses removed. So once that's undone and your wires are off the back, you can then lift that out of the way. You could alternatively leave the wires on the back and place the alternator somewhere where it doesn't stretch the wiring. The next jobs to do is to remove the power steering pump pulley and the water pump pulley. This will give you access to the bolts that you need. Okay. And with the water pump, definitely need to get these out of the way. You don't need a puller for these, they just come off like this. And you'll need to remove this idler as well. 15mm socket, center bolt, and you unwind it, it'll come off in one piece. Just remember, when you take it off, it has a locating peg in the hole. Okay, locating peg, and you have your hole here, and underneath you also have a bolt which is holding the casing on, just in there. The three most important bolts on the water pump are these three at the bottom here. Okay, these are the ones that go into the block and pull up the gasket and the casing onto the water gallery. Okay, so you might have trouble with these, I don't know. These are actually lubricated, so they've been out before, they've been taken out before, and they're okay. They might be corroded into place. So once you've got all the bolts out, and obviously I missed one here. Okay, these are shorter bolts. Take that out and you can take your water pump off, like so. On this engine, the power steering pump is in place with no piping on it. There are only four bolts that you need to undo. You don't need to take the pumping off the bracket, you need to take the bracket off the aluminium casing. Alright, once you've unscrewed it, you can then put it out of the way. So just lay it down somewhere. You don't need to disconnect the pipes on that. Alright, so lay this out of the way somewhere. Okay, there, we're nearly there now. Okay, on the casing itself, 1, 2, 3. Long bolt with nut, 13mm, and this one's actually screwed up, so I need a pair of mole grips on it. And the long bolt itself, leave the bolt in place. Alright, leave it just there. You'll see why when we put the casing back on. This one has a 10mm head, so remove that. Then that just leaves this, which is 13mm, to be undone. This is a nut on a stud, and you can undo that, get that out of the way. Once it's undone, you can then remove the casing. It's very clear that the P gasket was a paper gasket and it was siliconed into place. How we will clean this is with a old Stanley blade. Get rid of the old gunge. P gasket actually evens the casing out, so you want to fit the whole thing. And getting this gunk out of the way. Obviously the phantom silicon user was more concerned in saving money than he was actually fitting the proper P gasket. I'm using a M8 by 1.25 tap, a second tap, and this will clean out the threads. You'll be surprised how much rubbish will actually come out of a thread, except on the new engine. And remember, this had silicon in it, so I want to get the threads as clean as possible before we fit this gasket and the P gasket here. Alright, this one, genuine parts, and it's actually made of tin, so it's different from the original, which was paper, and fails, so this one should actually work a lot better. If you remember, I said keep this bolt in place, and this is going to be a key factor to supporting the casing while we fit it. Alright, so fit it in the bolt hole and just suspend it there for now. Okay, we then need to lube up with a bit of grease the water pump gasket. This is an old fitter's trick for getting it to stick into place. Alright, so brand new gasket, stick it into place, and we can now forget about it without struggling too much. The P gasket is actually really fiddly to fit, but I found the best way of doing this with the water pump bolts, the 3 at the bottom. Now they're just underneath my hand. I'm fitting the gasket in place, alright, just like this with the 3 bolts, lining them up and screwing them in. Just a closer look at this. Okay, I've got the P gasket here. Now push one of the 3 bolts into place, locate it, and I have my P gasket in place. It's just a matter of just loosely putting all the bolts in first, so you get it lined up, and you want 4 bolts in total. The one at the top here, okay, that I'm screwing in, has got the P gasket. Now the P gasket itself needs to be even, so the case pressure as you tighten it up will have this in an even line. Okay, so there you go. See that? It's in place. You can then go ahead, fit the rest of the bolts finger tight, and this is the first thing you need to do, get even pressure all the way around the casing. Don't forget this is aluminium and it flexes quite easily. So once I've been around once, nipped them up, I can then go around with a torque wrench and set them all to the nominal torque setting. This is on the screen here, and I would advise that you do all the bolts up evenly. Power steering pump can be refitted with the 4 bolts. Remember to get them in the right way. And then you can fit the idler into place. Remember you have a locating peg there. Once you've wound up the centre bolt, just remember it needs to be torqued up. Torque setting, screen here. So the reverse of stripping is fitting. Now you can fit these finger tight. Remember to get them around the right way before you put the belt on. So the same with the water pump pulley, you fit that on and just put the nuts in finger tight. Get your alternator back on. Now you see I'm pushing the bolt in from the back. Not a good idea. Push it in from the front. You probably noticed at some point that the cylinder head is actually off this. If you have the manifolds in place, you'll never be able to get the long bolt off. So keep this in mind if you have a short engine and you're rebuilding it. Long bolt from the front. Fantastic thing about these engines is the serpentine belt is so easy to fit. Alright, if you know how to do this, then I'm pretty sure you won't actually be watching this video. 1001 ways to put it on. I'm doing it this way. Over all the belts. Then pull it up. You got your belt on, and Bob's your uncle, you're away. The only thing you have to be aware of is getting the belts fully in the grooves. If you don't get them fully in the grooves, you end up with something like this, and it's not a good idea because it will throw the belt off almost straight away. So check them on the edges and adjust as necessary so they're fully in there. It's worth spending a few extra seconds to make sure that the belt is all in place. Alright, you can adjust it easily, no problem, and then you're done. If the belt is in good condition, the auxiliary belt, you'll have 2 markers that are apart from each other. If they're in line, then change the auxiliary belt. Just remember that these nuts were finger tight, so what you want to do is nip them up and then torque them up. These are also M8 threads. With those done, you can get your thermo viscous fan hub in place, and this turns anti-clockwise to tighten up the thread. Put it on there, you can spin it on, and once you're done you can then get your spanner, ta-da, and get it into place and nip it up. Alright, that should not come undone. Okay, that just leaves you to refit your cooling system, your hoses, make sure the pipes are all nipped up properly, correct grade of antifreeze, and away you go. You should be alright there. I shouldn't have to remind you, if you've used the torque wrench, don't forget to wind the thing off down to 0 once you store it up, okay? Hello and welcome to the Land Rover Toolbox videos. My name's Trailer Fitter and I'm going to take you through using Paddock's timing kit. we're going to have a look at using the support tool, which will aid us in removing the FIP, or commonly known as the fuel injection pump. We'll be using the 300 TDI engine in this tutorial, but this is very relevant to the 200 TDI engine as well. The pump pulley support tool is used to hold the pulley in place while you remove the diesel injector pump. Quite easy, and this just saves a lot of hassle. So before we remove the pump, there's quite a few things we have to remove first. I'll briefly go over these. You need to remove the injector pipes off the rear of the pump and completely clear away. You also need to remove the leak back, the solenoid connector. The boost pressure pipe to the top of the pump needs to be removed. This tool is applicable to the 200 TDI, however the 300 TDI might well have a throttle position sensor, and there's a connector just here. You also have your diesel inlet union, which is down here. The pipe needs to be removed. You'll notice also that the banjo has been screwed back into place. This just stops the dirt getting into it and losing the pieces. You also need to remove the throttle cable, that goes without saying. And on the back here you have a bracket with 2 bolts. You can see the bracket just here. Make sure you completely remove the bolts and nuts. So basically, with the pump removed, you can see the timing pulley is locked into place and it can't move. This means that you don't have to do anything with the timing belt. You'll need to have your crankshaft set at TDC. Quick way to see this is there's a marker on the pulley and there's a marker on the timing case. But you also need the timing pin in the rear of the engine as well. You can do this on the flywheel with one of the timing pins in the kit, like so. If you can't find the slot at TDC, then the crankshaft is 180 degrees out. The pump timing pin should slip in easily. Don't worry if it doesn't, because you'll be resetting the timing anyway. And you'll be wanting to remove these 3 bolts here and take the plate out, which is retaining the pump drive. You don't really have to remove the locking plate, as there is slots there to put the bolts through, but it's easier to get the plate out. Just remember to get it round the right way when you put it back in. The FIP is actually has its own drive and it's bolted to the timing pulley there. Okay, now I've moved that so I can see the bolt holes, and if you look closer here, these 2 is where you'll be screwing your bolt in from your kit. Fitting the tool, you want to make sure that your timing pin hole is relevant to the timing pin hole on the pump, and then you should be able to fit your bolts easily. Make sure they're where I told you to put them. That's vitally important. And you don't screw them all the way home and tight at the moment, just screw them in finger tight. Okay, so you have your 3 studs and nuts holding your pump actually on at the flange. The 3 nuts need to be removed completely. I'm just showing you there's one here, and then going on the other side of the pump there's another one here, and then you'll find another one underneath, and I'll have to show you this with this picture. Okay. Don't do this. This is not the way to do it. So what you should be doing is winding up these nuts just loosely, and then it will get to the point where it will start to push the pump out. Alright, as long as you've got the retaining nuts off the flange, that should just drop out easily. Okay, so it's a matter of just nipping those up, and that will hold the pulley in the casing properly, and you've got your pump removed. There you go, easy. You can see the pulley is retained in there by the bolts, and that's solid, so the timing belt hasn't slipped. What I'm going to do now is drop the pump back in, and that's quite easy to do. If you're fitting a second-hand pump, then it probably won't be timed. You want to be checking on the front flange. However, if this has come back from a reconditioner's, you'll have to make sure the locking plate is in, which is just here. Okay, so just drop it in loosely, and then what I'm going to do is start to remove these 2 bolts, and then I can push the pump in further. Once your flange is fully home, you can then tighten these 3 bolts up, which is 25 Newton meters. So once that's secure, you can then take the tool off, and then it's a matter of timing this pump back up to the pulley. This pump you can move about on the drive, and you can see where the timing pin should go. We're not going to fit that at the moment. First we're going to do is put the plate in, make sure it's lined up with the 3 holes, the 3 bolt holes, and put the bolts in just loosely at the moment. Okay, so you can then use a socket and move your pump drive about and time the injection pump up perfectly. This pin, you should know this by now watching my tutorials, has got to slide in and out easily and not nip. Once you've got that there, you can then tighten your bolts up. With this timed up properly, there should be no reason for the engine or the timing of the pump to be out at all. As long as the engine hasn't moved and you've put the pump back on, then that should be perfectly timed. So you can fit your piping back in and bleed it up, fit up your plate with a new gasket and put that on. If the crankshaft was set up properly in the first place, there should be no reason that this engine shouldn't run. Okay, hello, welcome back to the Land Rover Toolbox videos. You'll probably notice we've got a new logo now. Right, anyway, we've been showing you how to do timing belts on the 200 TDI and the 300 TDI. What we've already learned is to time up the engine ready for either taking the belt off or changing the pump. Now, the fuel pump is timed with a pin and the cam with a marker, and we already know that the crank is timed up with this little baby here. Hopefully if you've seen our tutorials on timing up the pump with the cover plate on, then you'll know that it's possible to do with a timing pin once the engine is set. Just to recap, the timing pin goes into a slot, which you'll see later, and once this is timed up correctly, you can then lock the timing pulley onto the pump drive itself. This is relevant basically for the Bosch VE pumps that's fitted to the Land Rover TDI engines, but it goes a little bit further because quite a few engines have this pump. Okay, well it's time to introduce you to some more accuracy. This tool here is AST4398G, which is a diesel pump setting tool. The service tool actually screws into this service port here between the injector pipes, and you can see here it's actually got an extension for a dial gauge so it can be put in, and then you can read the lift, which is relevant to injection timing. Generally there is a figure which will tell you where the lift is at TDC. Watching the dial gauge there, we're actually going to take it to 1.54 millimeters, which is 1 turn, and then up to 5.4, and since I didn't zero it correctly, it's 0.01 of a mil out. Generally what we're looking at is to get the most accurate reading we can to set the pump with the engine, so this is the best way to do it. Just to justify this tool, I'm going to show you something. I'm putting a drill bit in which is 9.5 millimeters, which is near enough the timing pin, and as I move it you can see that there is play here. There is 0.06 millimeters of lift that's play here. You can see that, and at rest this is what the timing is set at, which is actually wrong for this pump. You'll have to make up your own mind if this is unacceptable to you. The timing pin is the tool that is recommended by Land Rover when setting the pump timing. DTIs are always the best way to measure any type of lift very accurately. Cracking open some engine tuning data or technical data from the PDFs that you can get, we're looking at injection timing, and this is 1.54 millimeter lift at top dead center, and with electronic EGR it's 1.40 millimeters of lift at TDC. Looking at the Land Rover Discovery one with EDC, you'll see it's 0.45 millimeters lift at TDC, so there is a big difference between the pump timing. You may never come across pump timing issues and setting the injection timing because you can use a pin, but when you wander into the realms of unknown and putting different pumps on different engines, or even tackling different Bosch VE pumps, this tool will cover quite a few different engines with this pump fitted. This is our pump without EGR, and this is set at 1.54 millimeters of lift at TDC. And this is our pump with electronic EGR, which will be set at 1.40 millimeters lift at TDC. Okay, well I hope that's been a bit of an insight for you to see what else is possible and how accurate you can actually get timing on your 300 TDI or even your 200 TDI engines. Please just remember that it is actually quite expensive to make videos like this, so don't go uploading these onto YouTube or anywhere else. Just give somebody a link to buy it. That will keep us making more of these videos for you. That's it from us. My name's Trailer Fitter and this is LRTV.